Hi, my name is Alex Dolphin, and welcome back to another episode of Ex Ante. Today we're going to discuss the case Nelson v. State. This case was heard in the Supreme Court of Alaska in the year 1979. Let's go ahead and jump into the facts of the case. So Nelson, the defendant here, had driven his truck with some friends off-road in Alaska, and he got his truck stuck in the muck, essentially. And Nelson decided, I got to get my truck out of here. It's late at night. It's past midnight at this point. What am I going to do? So he begins walking. He begins looking. Cars are passing him by. Eventually, he finds this tow truck compound. And he says, hey, I could just jump in this tow truck and then go drive out there and save my truck and pull it out. So that's what he decides to do. He thinks that's a good idea. So he goes out, takes the tow truck, tries to get his truck out. He gets it stuck. So then he goes back and gets another truck from the yard, tries to get that truck unstuck and that truck unstuck. And it just becomes a big old mess. And eventually, an employee for the highway department comes over and puts him underneath a citizen's arrest, essentially, and says, hey, man, you can't be doing this. Nelson is essentially charged with reckless destruction of personal property and joyriding. And Nelson is appealing his conviction. He was convicted in the trial court, and he's appealing it, and he's saying he is entitled to the necessity defense. And the jury instruction on the necessity defense was wrong. It was a bad definition of necessity. He says that, it puts it into an objective after the fact test instead of a subjective reasonable man test. And I'm smiling a little bit because objective usually is what we would call a reasonable man, not an objective, not a subjective reasonable man. So I think his lawyer himself was a little bit confounded. Anyways, the court says, you know what? No, this is not a good time for the necessity defense. First, they define the necessity defense. They basically say the necessity defense is a rule of public policy. It's a justification saying that we, as a society, find your actions to actually be good. Even though they might have violated the criminal law, your actions were good and they were justified. The three factors that the court lays out are, one, that the act must be done to prevent some significant evil. Two, there must be no adequate alternative to prevent that significant evil than the act that you're going to take, the unlawful act that you're going to take. And then three, the harm that you've caused by violating the law cannot be greater than the harm that you prevented by violating the law. So that's a proportionality requirement. Essentially, they say, there was no dire need for you to steal your truck. You said it was going to tip over, but there was not a clear and imminent threat to your truck that justified you in taking, stealing a person's tow truck and then ruining it and getting it all stuck and mucked up. Essentially, a reasonable person, even if you're entitled to an objective, reasonable person test, would not have done what you've done. You weighed the evils in a wrong way. You basically caused destruction of truck to try and prevent destruction to your truck. One would have to be greater than the other with the proportionality requirement. So that's the case. The necessity defense, I think, is very interesting because it is the way that the utilitarian ideas have gotten themselves into our law. So utilitarian idea is that you need to do what's going to promote the greatest amount of good, the greatest amount of happiness, even if that means using someone else's property, as a means to an end. You're justified in doing so because you're going to maximize human happiness. Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill are the key philosophers of this movement. It's interesting because the utilitarian philosophy has snaked its way into the law, and it's very apparent that the necessity defense is basically a relic of utilitarian philosophy, and it's a footprint of utilitarian philosophy on the criminal law. And it's also in the tort law, but this is the criminal context that we're talking about. So we normally think about the necessity defense as a justification for the destruction of property, right? The destruction of property. You're justified in destroying property if it's necessary to prevent a greater evil. Could the necessity defense be applied to basically murder? That seems probably wild at first glance, but let's think about it a little bit more. I'm going to illustrate a version of the famous utilitarian trolley problem. So let's say that there is a fire approaching a home, and this home is right on the edge of the woods. This home, you're not a firefighter or police officer, but you know that if you burn down this home, you're going to create a fire break, and the rest of the neighborhood won't be burnt. The kids that are in those homes won't be killed. The property won't be destroyed. So you say, okay, I want to burn down this home. I'm justified under the necessity justification to say, hey, I'm okay burning this home because I'm preventing a greater evil. And that would make sense, right? So now let's complicate the problem a little bit more. Let's say that inside that home, it's not a family, but there's one person, and it's a heroin junkie, essentially, sadly. This person is in there, and they are on heroin. And you go in and you say, hey, I need you to move. I'm going to burn down this house so I can prevent the rest of the fire from spreading to the neighborhood and create a fire break. And the person says, no, I'm not moving. I'm here. You can't move me. Okay? And they say, I'm staying here. So you go back out. You're dismayed. You're like, man, I really thought I was going to be able to save this neighborhood from all the harm. Well, would you still be justified in burning down that house, even if the person were in it? Would you be justified in committing murder, purposeful murder, because you're going to prevent the many deaths of the kids who are in those homes and and the destruction to the property in the rest of the neighborhood? So, this is a clear and imminent danger. The fire is coming. If you don't do something about it, then it's going to hit the rest of the houses. You are essentially you are stopping a greater harm from occurring. So let's just say that there are kids in those houses. They won't get out. Well, if you don't stop the fire by creating the fire break and burning down the house where the person is in it, then maybe 10 kids are going to die, let's say. And if that happens, that's definitely a greater harm than one person who is inside the house dying. And so you're weighing the balance of these human lives. And I think it's interesting to think about the necessity justification being applied in a scenario where there's human life at stake. The utilitarian principles that underlie the necessity justification would allow it to be used to take one human life to save 10 other human lives. But the law has not generally recognized the necessity justification in this case. But I think there could be a good argument for it, namely on utilitarian principles that we should, we can use one person as a means to an end if we're going to better off society as a whole in the long term. We can let the one person perish for the herd to survive and for society to be better. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to see more, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye-bye.